The people who knock on your door during a storm are usually carrying either trouble or truth. Rain hammered the roof of Ryan Parker's garage hard enough to drown out almost every other sound. Outside, water rushed along the curb beneath flickering streetlights while cold wind pushed sheets of rain across the quiet Seattle neighborhood. Inside the garage, however, everything felt warm. A yellow work lamp glowed over a cluttered workbench covered with tools, blueprints, and mechanical components. Ryan tightened the final bolt on a small prototype before setting down his wrench and checking the clock. It was nearly 9 o'clock at night. Inside the house, his 10-year-old daughter Emma sat at the kitchen table, finishing a science project she needed for school the next morning. This had become their routine. Emma worked on homework. Ryan worked on ideas. Neither complained. Neither expected life to be easy. They simply kept moving forward. A sudden clap of thunder shook the windows. Ryan glanced toward the garage door. "Looks like that storm is getting worse," he muttered. He switched off several lights and began putting away tools for the evening. The neighborhood was usually quiet after dark, especially during weather like this. That was why the headlights surprised him. Bright white beams appeared through the rain outside the garage window. Ryan frowned. Nobody visited this late, especially not during a storm. The vehicle slowly rolled into his driveway and stopped. It was not a delivery truck. It was not a neighbor's car. It was a sleek black luxury sedan worth more than most homes on the street. Ryan stood still. The engine shut off. Rain continued pounding against the roof. Then the driver's side door opened. A woman stepped out carrying no umbrella. She hurried through the rain toward the house. Water soaked her white coat almost instantly. Ryan stared in disbelief. He recognized her before she even reached the porch. Madison Reed, Chief Executive Officer of Reed Transit Technologies, one of the most powerful business leaders in the region. The same woman who had once dismissed his proposal during a meeting he had spent months preparing for. Before Ryan could process why she was standing in his driveway, the front doorbell rang. Inside the house, Emma looked up from her project. "Are we expecting someone?" she called. "No," Ryan answered. He walked through the garage and entered the house. The bell rang again. When he opened the door, Madison stood there breathing heavily from the run through the rain. Wet strands of chestnut hair clung to her face. Her white coat was soaked. Her expression was something Ryan had never seen before. Not confidence, not authority, not control. Worry, genuine worry. For several seconds neither spoke. Rain fell behind her in silver sheets illuminated by the porch light. Finally Ryan stepped aside. "You should come in before you catch pneumonia." Madison managed a faint smile. "Thank you." Emma watched curiously as Madison entered the house. The CEO looked around at the modest living room, the family photographs on the walls, and the science project spread across the dining table. Everything about the house felt ordinary. Honest. Real. Ryan handed her a towel. "What are you doing here?" Madison looked down at the towel before meeting his eyes again. The confident executive who once controlled every room she entered seemed strangely uncertain. Another roll of thunder echoed outside. Then she took a slow breath and said the last thing Ryan Parker ever expected to hear. "I need your help." Ryan Parker stared at Madison Reed for several seconds, waiting for an explanation that did not immediately come. Rain continued striking the windows while the warmth of the small house contrasted sharply with the storm outside. Emma quietly gathered a few papers from the dining table, sensing that something important was happening. Madison accepted a cup of coffee Ryan placed in front of her and wrapped both hands around it, as if trying to steady herself. The image felt almost unreal. Only a year earlier, Ryan had sat across from Madison in a conference room where she controlled every decision. Now she sat at his kitchen table, soaked from the rain, looking more vulnerable than powerful. "You should probably start from the beginning," Ryan said calmly. Madison nodded. "I know." She glanced around the room before speaking. Family photographs lined the walls. A school calendar hung beside the refrigerator. Emma's science project occupied half the table. Nothing about the house felt designed to impress anyone. Yet somehow it felt more genuine than many executive offices Madison had visited. "This is nice," she said quietly. Ryan smiled faintly. "It is home." Emma looked up. "Dad built most of it himself." Madison seemed surprised. "Really? The porch, the garage shelves, the workshop benches," Emma said proudly. "He can build almost anything." Ryan laughed. "That is an exaggeration." "Not by much," Emma replied. For the first time that evening, Madison smiled. Then the smile faded as reality returned. I wish I were here for a better reason. Ryan sat across from her. Then tell me the reason. Madison lowered her eyes toward the coffee. For a moment, she seemed unsure where to begin. Outside, thunder rolled across the neighborhood again. Inside, only the ticking of a wall clock filled the silence. Finally, she spoke. My company is in trouble. Ryan remained quiet. A serious project? He asked. The biggest project we have ever undertaken. She paused. And it is falling apart. Ryan leaned back slightly. He remembered the confidence she once projected. Seeing her struggle to admit this felt strange. I assume you have engineers. Hundreds. Consultants. Dozens. Then why are you here? Madison looked directly at him. Because none of them have solved it. Emma glanced between them with growing curiosity. Ryan folded his arms. And you think I can? Madison hesitated. I think you might be the only one who can. The words settled heavily over the table. Ryan did not respond immediately. Instead, he studied her expression. There was no arrogance left in it. No corporate polish. Just concern. Genuine concern. Madison looked toward the garage visible through the back window. Warm light still glowed inside. I spent years believing success only came from large teams and massive resources, she admitted. Then I started hearing your name again. Ryan raised an eyebrow. From who? Engineers. Former colleagues. People who quietly respected your work. Emma smiled proudly. I told you, Dad. Ryan shook his head. Madison continued. The more I learned, the more I realized I never really understood what you were building. Another silence followed. Then Ryan looked at her carefully. You drove through a storm at night to tell me this? Madison slowly nodded. No, she took a deep breath. I drove through a storm because what I need from you is much bigger than advice. Ryan Parker remained silent for several seconds after hearing those words. Rain continued sliding down the kitchen windows while the storm outside seemed to press against the house. Emma quietly gathered her books and looked toward her father. She could tell something important was unfolding. Should I go finish my project in my room? She asked. Ryan smiled gently. That is probably a good idea. Emma nodded, but not before giving Madison one last curious look. When she disappeared down the hallway, the house became noticeably quieter. Madison stared into her coffee cup for a moment before finally speaking again. What I am about to tell you does not leave this room. Ryan leaned back in his chair. That sounds serious. It is. She took a slow breath. 6 months ago, our company launched the largest transportation infrastructure project in our history. Ryan listened carefully. The autonomous transit network. Madison looked surprised. You know about it? Ryan shrugged. Everyone in Seattle knows about it. Madison managed a faint smile before returning to the problem. The project was supposed to become the model for several cities across the country. Supposed to? Ryan asked. Madison nodded. The system keeps failing during full-scale testing. Her voice grew quieter. Not every time. Not consistently. Just enough to make the entire network unreliable. Ryan folded his arms thoughtfully. Intermittent failures are usually the worst kind. Exactly. Madison looked relieved that someone immediately understood. Our engineers have spent months chasing the problem. Every solution creates 2 new problems. Ryan studied her expression. There was more she was not saying. What are you leaving out? He asked. Madison hesitated. Outside, another flash of lightning briefly illuminated the room. Investors are starting to panic. That is expected. The board is losing confidence. Also expected. Madison lowered her eyes. And if we cannot solve this within a few weeks, thousands of jobs could be affected. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Ryan understood immediately why she had driven through a storm to get here. This was not about corporate pride anymore. Real people were involved. Families, employees, communities. He stood and walked toward the kitchen window. Rainwater flowed down the glass in shimmering lines. How bad is it? He asked quietly. Madison did not answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight Ryan had not heard before. Bad enough that I have not slept properly in over a month. Ryan turned back toward her. For the first time, he saw exhaustion beneath the polished appearance. The powerful CEO everyone admired looked less like an executive and more like a person carrying an impossible burden. Madison slowly opened a leather folder she had brought with her. Technical diagrams, failure reports, and system schematics covered the pages. She slid them across the table. Ryan glanced at the first page, then the second, then the third. His expression changed almost immediately. Madison noticed. You see something? Ryan did not answer. He continued reading. Several more seconds passed. Finally, he looked up. I think I know where this starts. Hope flashed across Madison's face for the first time that evening. You do? Ryan nodded slowly. Maybe. Then he pointed toward one particular section of the report. But before we talk about solutions, there is something you still have not told me. Madison's hopeful expression faded. She already knew what he meant. Because the biggest secret was not hidden inside the reports. It was hidden inside the request she had not yet found the courage to make. Madison Reed looked at the reports spread across the kitchen table and slowly closed the folder. The rain outside had softened slightly, but water still streamed down the windows as if the storm refused to leave. Ryan Parker remained standing near the table, waiting patiently. He had spent years learning that silence often revealed more than questions ever could. Madison stared at the coffee cup in front of her. The steam had nearly disappeared. You are right, she finally said. There is something else. Ryan pulled out a chair and sat down again. Then tell me. Madison released a slow breath. The reason I came here is not because I want your opinion. Ryan nodded. I figured that much. She looked directly into his eyes. I need more than advice. Another moment passed. The ticking wall clock filled the room. Somewhere down the hallway, Emma's bedroom door closed softly. Madison seemed to gather every ounce of courage she had left. Then she said it. I want you to take over the project. Ryan blinked once. For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely surprised. Take over. Madison nodded. Lead the recovery team. Ryan almost laughed, not because the idea was funny, but because it felt impossible. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious. Ryan leaned back and shook his head slowly. You have hundreds of engineers. Yes. Department heads. Yes. Senior consultants who probably charge more per week than I make in a month. Madison gave a tired smile. Also yes. Ryan spread his hands. Then why would you put me in charge? Madison's answer came immediately. Because you already understand the problem better than anyone else. The room fell quiet again. Ryan looked toward the garage visible through the back window. Warm lights still glowed across the workbench where he had spent countless nights building ideas nobody cared about. The contrast felt almost unreal. A year ago, he could not get 10 minutes of serious attention inside Madison's company. Now she was asking him to help save its most important project. Madison continued carefully. The board does not know I am here. Ryan looked back at her. What? Only 2 people know I drove here tonight. You came without approval? I came because I am running out of options. The honesty in her voice carried no trace of executive polish. Ryan could hear exhaustion behind every word. Madison folded her hands together. If this project fails, thousands of employees will feel the consequences. She paused. Many of them have families. Ryan understood exactly why she chose those words. She knew he would think about people before profit. She was right. You want me to walk into your company and lead a team that probably does not even know who I am, Ryan said. Some of them know exactly who you are, Madison replied quietly. More than you realize. Ryan studied her expression. There was no manipulation there. No strategy. Just hope. Genuine hope. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Madison reached into her folder and removed a visitor badge. She placed it gently on the table between them. The plastic badge seemed strangely small considering the weight of what it represented. Come to headquarters tomorrow, she said softly. Meet the team. See the situation for yourself. Ryan looked at the badge, but made no move to pick it up. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the glass. Inside, the future of both their lives suddenly seemed to rest on a simple decision he was not ready to make. Ryan Parker did not touch the visitor badge after Madison Reed left. Long after her black sedan disappeared into the rain, the badge remained exactly where she had placed it on the kitchen table. The house eventually grew quiet. Emma finished her school project and came back into the living room carrying a notebook. She immediately noticed that her father was staring at the small plastic card. You have been looking at that thing for 10 minutes, she said. Ryan smiled faintly. Have I? Emma sat across from him. You always do that when you are thinking too hard. Ryan laughed softly. I did not know that. I know. She glanced at the badge. Are you going to do it? Ryan leaned back in his chair. I honestly do not know. Emma considered that answer. Because she said no before? The question landed with surprising accuracy. Ryan looked toward the rain-streaked window. A year earlier, he had walked into Reed Transit Technologies carrying months of work and years of experience. He remembered the conference room. He remembered the presentation. Most of all, he remembered leaving with the feeling that nobody had truly listened. Maybe a little, he admitted. Emma folded her arms. You always tell me not to make decisions when I am upset. Ryan raised an eyebrow. I do say that. Then are you upset? Ryan thought about it. Surprisingly, the answer was no. The disappointment from that meeting had faded long ago. Life had been too busy for resentment. Mortgage payments still arrived every month. Emma still needed school supplies. The garage still needed repairs. There had never been time to sit around feeling bitter. No, he finally said. I am not upset. Emma smiled. Good. Ryan laughed. That was easy. Not really. She pointed toward the badge. You are scared. This time Ryan laughed harder. Where did you learn to analyze people like that? From watching you. The answer silenced him for a moment. Emma looked down at the table. Dad, when people at school think I cannot do something, you always tell me that their opinion is not my future. Ryan nodded slowly. That sounds like something I would say. Then why are you listening to an old opinion now? The room became very quiet. Outside, the storm had weakened to a steady drizzle. Water still trickled from the roof, but the thunder had disappeared. Ryan looked at his daughter and realized she had just exposed the real problem. It was not about Madison. It was not about the company. It was about reopening a door he had closed a long time ago. Emma stood and gathered her books. Before leaving, she paused beside him. If people need help, you usually help them. Ryan looked up. Usually. Then maybe the question is not whether they deserve your help. She smiled gently. Maybe the question is whether you want to be the person you always tell me to be. With that, she headed toward her room. Ryan remained alone at the table. For several minutes, he stared at the visitor badge. Then he reached forward and picked it up for the first time. The plastic felt surprisingly heavy. Not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. A second chance. Not for Madison. Not even for the company. A second chance for an idea that had never stopped living inside the garage behind his house. The next morning arrived with clear skies and cool autumn air. The storm had passed, but Ryan Parker still felt the weight of the decision waiting for him. After driving Emma to school, he sat alone in his pickup truck for several minutes outside the headquarters of Reed Transit Technologies. The glass tower rose above the city like a monument to a world he had left behind long ago. He looked at the visitor badge resting on the passenger seat. Then he picked it up and walked inside. The lobby was larger than he remembered. Polished stone floors reflected sunlight streaming through enormous windows. Employees moved quickly between meetings, carrying tablets, reports, and coffee cups. Most of them paid little attention to the man in the brown jacket approaching the reception desk. Ryan checked in and was escorted to an executive conference room overlooking Seattle Harbor. When the elevator doors opened, Madison Reed was already waiting. For the first time since arriving at his house, she seemed slightly more hopeful. You came, she said. Ryan nodded. I said I would look. Madison smiled. That is more than I had yesterday. She led him through several secure hallways before entering the company's engineering operations center. The room immediately caught Ryan's attention. Dozens of large displays covered entire walls. Engineers monitored data streams from active transit systems. Technical teams gathered around workstations discussing performance reports. Yet despite all the activity, Ryan noticed something else. Tension. Nobody looked relaxed. Nobody looked confident. The atmosphere felt like a hospital treating a patient whose condition continued getting worse. Madison introduced Ryan to several senior engineers. Some greeted him politely. Others seemed confused. A few appeared openly skeptical. Ryan understood why. To them, he was an outsider. A man from a garage suddenly walking into one of the largest projects in the country. Then Madison did something nobody expected. She stepped to the center of the room and addressed the entire engineering staff. Conversations stopped immediately. Everyone, I need your attention. The room fell silent. Madison looked around carefully before continuing. Ryan Parker is here because I asked him to be here. Several employees exchanged glances. Madison continued. Effective immediately, he will be helping us evaluate every aspect of the project and recommend solutions. The silence grew even deeper. Ryan could practically hear the surprise spreading across the room. One senior manager shifted uncomfortably. Another folded his arms. Madison noticed every reaction but continued anyway. I expect every member of this team to give him full cooperation. Her voice remained calm, but the authority behind it was unmistakable. When she finished speaking, nobody argued. Nobody objected. Yet Ryan could feel the doubts surrounding him. Madison quietly handed him a tablet loaded with project data. "Where do you want to start?" she asked. Ryan studied the information for only a few moments before pointing toward a system diagram displayed on one of the largest screens. There, several engineers looked surprised. One of them frowned. "You have not even reviewed everything yet." Ryan nodded. "I know." The engineer looked confused. "Then how can you be sure?" Ryan stared at the screen. The answer seemed obvious to him. "Because everyone keeps looking at the symptom." He pointed again. "And nobody is looking at the cause." For the first time all morning, the room became completely still. The Engineering Operations Center remained silent after Ryan Parker pointed toward the system diagram. Several engineers exchanged skeptical looks. One senior analyst stepped forward and adjusted his glasses. "We have examined that section for months," he said. Ryan nodded. "I believe you." The analyst frowned. "Then what are we missing?" Ryan walked closer to the giant display. Lines of data flowed across the screen while performance metrics updated in real time. He studied them quietly. The room watched. Madison Reed stood near the back, saying nothing. She knew enough to let him think. After nearly a minute, Ryan pointed toward a series of timing sequences buried deep inside the system architecture. "This layer is compensating for a delay that should not exist." One engineer shook his head. "That delay is normal." Ryan glanced at him. It became normal because everyone accepted it. The engineer opened his mouth to respond, but stopped. Ryan continued. "You built protections around the symptom instead of removing the source." The room grew quiet again. Another engineer began reviewing the data on her tablet. Her expression slowly changed. "Wait a second." Several people turned toward her. She enlarged a report and compared it against Ryan's observation. He might be right. Suddenly conversations erupted throughout the room. Teams began checking logs, simulations, and historical test results. Madison watched the entire scene unfold with growing disbelief. Ryan had been in the building less than an hour, yet he had already redirected months of investigation. By mid-afternoon, conference rooms filled with engineers reviewing assumptions they had considered settled. Ryan moved from team to team, answering questions and examining reports. What surprised everyone was not his intelligence. It was his attitude. He never acted superior. He never reminded anyone that they had ignored him before. He simply helped. Late in the afternoon, Madison found him standing alone beside a window overlooking Elliott Bay. Cargo ships moved slowly across the water beneath clear skies. "You were right," she said quietly. Ryan shrugged. "We still have work to do." Madison smiled. "Most people would enjoy saying I told you so." Ryan looked out the window. That would not solve the problem. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Madison asked the question that had been bothering her all day. "Why are you helping us like this?" Ryan seemed genuinely confused. "Because you need help." "After everything that happened?" Ryan turned toward her. "You mean after the meeting?" Madison nodded. Ryan thought about it. "Honestly, I stopped thinking about that a long time ago." Madison stared at him. "You never resented me?" Ryan laughed softly. "Madison, I am a single father. Between raising Emma, paying bills, and keeping my garage running, I barely have time to remember what I had for breakfast." For the first time in weeks, Madison laughed. A real laugh. Not the practiced smile of a CEO. Something genuine. Then her expression softened. "I do not think you realize how unusual that is." Ryan looked puzzled. "What?" "The fact that you are not angry." Ryan glanced across the operations center where engineers were now working together with renewed energy. "Holding on to anger is expensive." He smiled faintly. "I had more important things to build." Madison followed his gaze. In that moment, she understood something that none of the reports, meetings, or recommendations had ever revealed. The most remarkable thing about Ryan Parker was never the technology he created. It was the character of the man who created it. Over the next 3 weeks, something remarkable began happening inside Reed Transit Technologies. The atmosphere that had once been dominated by frustration slowly transformed into cautious optimism. Test results improved. System stability increased. Teams that had spent months arguing over competing theories started working together again. Every day brought another small victory. Ryan Parker became a familiar sight throughout the engineering center. Though he never behaved like the leader everyone increasingly viewed him as. He arrived early, carried his own coffee, listened more than he spoke, and spent most of his time helping engineers solve problems rather than taking credit for solutions. The more people worked with him, the more their skepticism disappeared. One afternoon, Madison Reed entered a conference room expecting to find a heated technical debate. Instead, she discovered several senior engineers laughing while Ryan sketched diagrams across a whiteboard. The sight alone would have been impossible just a month earlier. "What happened in here?" Madison asked. One engineer smiled. "He convinced 3 departments to stop blaming each other." Another laughed. "Apparently that is harder than solving the actual problem." Ryan shook his head. The actual problem was easier. The room erupted in laughter. Madison watched quietly. Something had changed. Not just in the project. In the people. For the first time in months, hope had returned. Later that evening, after most employees had gone home, Madison found Ryan reviewing performance data alone in a small conference room. The city lights glowed beyond the windows while ferries moved across the dark waters below. "You should go home," she said. Ryan looked up. "I will in a minute." Madison sat across from him. "Emma must miss having you around." Ryan smiled. "She reminds me every day." Madison looked down at the reports spread across the table. "The board approved the latest projections this morning." Ryan nodded. "That is good news. They are calling it the biggest turnaround in company history." Ryan simply returned to studying the reports. Madison shook her head. "You really do not care about recognition, do you?" Ryan thought about the question. "Recognition is nice." He looked out the window toward the city lights. "But it is not why I came." Madison remained silent. After a moment she asked, "Then why did you come?" Ryan smiled faintly. "Because thousands of people depended on this working." The answer lingered between them. Madison realized she had spent years evaluating people based on credentials, titles, and influence. Yet the person who had saved her company was motivated by something much simpler. Responsibility. The next morning, the final full-scale system test began. Engineers gathered throughout the operations center. Executives watched from observation rooms. Investors monitored updates remotely. The tension was impossible to ignore. Madison stood beside Ryan as the countdown appeared on the largest display. 3, 2, 1. The system activated. Data streamed across every screen. Seconds passed. Then minutes. No failures appeared. No warning alerts sounded. Every performance metric remained stable. The room became perfectly silent as everyone waited for something to go wrong. Nothing did. 5 minutes later, applause erupted across the operations center. Engineers stood from their stations. Some laughed. Some cheered. A few simply sat in stunned disbelief. Madison looked toward Ryan. He was smiling, but his attention was not on the celebration. It was on a photograph taped beside his tablet. A photograph of Emma. And in that moment, Madison finally understood who had truly kept him moving through every rejection, every setback, and every long night spent alone in a garage. 3 weeks after the successful system test, Reed Transit Technologies hosted a special event at its headquarters overlooking Seattle Harbor. Industry leaders, investors, city officials, and employees filled the main auditorium. Large screens displayed the company's renewed transportation platform and the results that had transformed a looming crisis into a remarkable success story. Backstage, Ryan Parker adjusted the collar of a borrowed suit jacket and looked completely out of place. He had spent most of his life in garages, workshops, and construction sites. Standing behind a stage curtain while hundreds of people filled an auditorium felt far less comfortable than rebuilding an engine. Beside him stood Emma, who looked far more excited than he did. "You are nervous," she said. Ryan smiled. "I am not nervous." Emma laughed. "Dad, you have checked your watch 6 times in 3 minutes." Ryan looked down at his wrist. "Maybe a little." Emma slipped her hand into his. "You will be fine." Across the stage, Madison Reed prepared to address the audience. The room gradually settled into silence as she approached the podium. Behind her, photographs of engineers, project teams, and system milestones appeared across the giant screens. She began by discussing innovation, teamwork, and perseverance. The audience listened attentively. Then her tone changed. "There is someone I need to talk about today," she said. The room grew quiet. Madison paused for a moment before continuing. "A few months ago, Our company faced the most serious challenge in its history. We had resources. We had talent. We had experience. What we did not have was the answer. The audience remained focused. Madison looked toward the front row where Ryan and Emma now sat together. One rainy night, I drove to a small house in a quiet neighborhood because I had run out of options. Several people exchanged curious looks. I expected to find an engineer. Madison smiled softly. Instead, I found something much more important. The room became completely still. I found character. Ryan lowered his eyes slightly. Madison continued. The man I met had every reason to turn me away. He had been overlooked. He had been underestimated. He had been told no. The audience listened without moving. Instead of resentment, I found grace. Instead of pride, I found humility. Instead of revenge, I found someone willing to help. The giant screens changed. A photograph of Ryan's modest garage appeared behind her. Murmurs spread quietly through the room. Madison looked directly toward Ryan. The solution that helped save this project did not come from a corner office. Another photograph appeared. Ryan working late at a cluttered workbench. It came from a father who never stopped building. The auditorium fell silent. Not the silence of boredom. The silence of understanding. Madison stepped away from the podium and motioned toward the stage. Ryan Parker, would you please join me? Applause began immediately. Then it grew louder. Then louder still. Ryan looked at Emma. She was already smiling. Go, she whispered. Ryan walked onto the stage as hundreds of people rose to their feet. The applause echoed through the auditorium. Yet what affected him most was not the standing ovation. It was seeing Emma in the front row looking prouder than she had ever looked before. Madison handed him a small framed photograph. Ryan glanced down and immediately recognized it. It was a picture taken during the stormy night when she arrived at his home. The garage light glowed behind him. Rain covered the driveway. The moment that changed everything had been captured forever. Madison smiled. Sometimes the people who save the future are the ones we almost fail to notice. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The room simply stood in respectful silence. Because everyone finally understood that the greatest achievement was never the technology. It was the quiet dignity of the man who built it.